All right, awesome. Thank you everybody for joining today. You know me, Kaylee McMahon. I've got a special guest with us today, Kelly Stinson. Kelly has really impressed me in the multifamily industry as well as in the commercial investment industry, getting involved with many different building owners that we know, helping to save costs. So one of the ways that we make more income is by reducing costs. So we'll talk a little bit about in commercial real estate how her offerings or how her ideas that she puts together are able to save so many different owners money, aka make us more money as investors, as investors. And then also I wanted her perspective on her career and what she does as a woman in multifamily real estate, because there are not a lot of us. So Kelly, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience. I won't do it justice, and then we'll get going.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me today, Kaylee. I'm excited about our conversation. So something, I'm just going to open it up. So we're going to talk about toilets. Not a sexy topic, right? Can kind of be a little uncomfortable, but we have a lot of fun with it. And the reason why I find it so fun is because I'm partnered with an organization who focuses on water conservation through the installation of ultra high efficiency plumbing fixtures. So that's like your toilets, your shower heads, your aerators, your aerators that fit on your kitchen faucet as well as your bathroom faucets. So when it comes to like a multifamily property, and when you're looking at indoor water usage, like 24% of that indoor water usage is being attributed to toilets and the water flow in the toilets. So this is why it's so important as an asset owner to be able to understand what that correlation is between those interior fixture flow rates and how that's going to impact the water sewer expense line on the T12. So that's where I focus, working with all of our multifamily owners, hospitality, senior living, anywhere where there's water, I'm going to follow that. And I'll consult with you on that. Then we have crews that will come in and remove all the inefficient fixtures and put all the new ones in. So, I think, Kaylee, you've heard this particular example go around quite a bit through a lot of the conversations we've had. But, if you just take on average like a 200 unit property, and it's a $50,000 investment, and let's say we reduce the water sewer expenses by $50,000, right? And we're going to do that in the first year, then we have an asset value boost at like $769,000 if you're running it at like a 6.5 cap. But like in the DFW market, everything is going down. We're at what, like a 6 cap now. I think, I'm hearing like 5.75. So super exciting. You can, turn all of, that water that you're saving, turn that into, increased cash flow, and that makes the investors happy. So, and we all want to be happy with that.
Now, I want to touch on a couple of things that you said. We were talking a little bit about, so for example, you said 24% of the expenses typically go towards water. Is that what you said?
Yes. So good note. And it is like 24% of the interior water usage is attributed to the toilet usage.
Toilets. Okay.
So, yep. So on average, each of us flush a toilet 3 to 5 times a day. Okay. I didn't run that study. I don't think I want to run that study, but the EPA has run that study. So we're using their average. What we have found is that through the pandemic, everybody is staying at home more often. And because of that, all of that usage was being spread out amongst all those locations that each of us were visiting throughout the day. Well, now everybody's home. So we're seeing like a 3 to 5 time consumption increase on a lot of the properties that we're engaged on.
Yeah, that's insane. So for example, when you're looking at a 200 unit property versus like more units. So whether it's, different units, if you have many houses all in one area, or if you have many units all in one area, the bigger the property, the more impact it has on your income increase, right?
Mm-hmm. It absolutely can. And it'll also vary too, depending upon the water and sewer rates in those particular areas, because those are fluctuating all across the country. And we find that like in Tulsa, the sewer rate in Tulsa is 3 times the water rate. And that's where there's a lot of misconception, is that when we're looking at T12s, we're not taking into consideration sometimes that there's a sewer expense associated also with all of that interior water usage. So you need to look at both of those lines, because like in Ohio, most of the utilities in Ohio, they don't consolidate the water and sewer on one bill. They're two separate bills that come in.
Craziness. Oh my gosh. In
Yeah.
Texas, at least where I live in Texas, my county, for us, the water and sewer has definitely a different relationship than that was.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy. Now, for those of us that don't know, what is a T12?
A T12 is going to be your trailing 12 months of financials on a property. So it's going to list everything out from your income to your expenses. And at the end of it, then you're going to see what the net operating income looks like. And you may hear, and that's such a great question, Kaylee, because that's something that I learned along the way. I got so used to hearing the T12. And then one day I heard somebody say, I need your T6. And I'm like, what? And then I'm like, okay, so the T12, 12 months, T6 will be the 6 months. Especially with the pandemic, we're asking a lot for very specific, like a T3 or even just the T1, right? Just the last 30 days. So really important, as we are walking this multifamily investing journey, to be able to understand what each of these documents are, what the terminology is. So
Yeah, so as
question.
we go through this gamut of all the ways that you can invest in commercial properties, there's some terms that are that cross across different asset types. And so what I'm trying to do is make sure that we can take your knowledge and really use it, because depending on who's listening to this, when they're listening to it, you know what I mean? There's a lot of jargon,
Yes.
Someone that's newer to the industry, I've got a gal on one of my deals and she's newer and she's like, I have no idea what 95% of that crap you just typed out was. And I'm like, oh my God,
Yes.
so clarifying.
Yes.
So going back to the T12 question right before that, when you're talking about the toilet consumption, that typically it'll make up that usage or that amount of the usage of the complex. Now, if I was looking at a property where we've already gone ahead and put in shower heads, we put in aerators on the sink, we've made those little changes,
Mm-hmm.
and then really what we have left is the toilets. On that property, it's a smaller property, so and then we're also rubbing back. So that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about, kind of if they're already rubbing it back, if they're not. So rubbing is RUBS, RUBS, ratio utility bill back system. And so, for example, what we do is if it's an all bills paid property, all bills paid unit, or the complex is paying the bills, we'll bill it back to the tenant. And so if we have multiple units that are set up like that, then we can employ a company and they will basically put a new name on the bill instead of the complex, and it will go directly to the tenant, and they can bill up to 80% of water, sewer, utilities, back to the tenant. And then 20% comes back to the complex owner. Now, we were contemplating the other day on doing this, but then decided, and I could be wrong, we decided it wasn't worth it because we had half of, basically out of only 26 units, we had half of the toilets already replaced. And again, like I mentioned, the shower heads and aerators were already, airheads, were already replaced.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, okay, so all that's left is the toilets, but only half the toilets are left. And it's already 26 units. So it's really 13 units that we're replacing that on. So realistically, if we're already rubbing back also, so we're only paying 20% of the total bills anyway, and we put in a toilet that costs this much money, and we employ someone with their labor to put it in too, whatever, what the break-even cost didn't make sense to me at that point, because it was, because of, like I said, it was only 13 units, and that was all that was in there, and we were already rubbing back or ratio utility billing back. Now, if you go into a property where they're not doing ratio utility billing, and it's a master meter, and especially if you have a larger amount of units, like 100, 200, things like that, would that be more of the appropriate place to say, let's go ahead and do a clean sweep, buy a bunch of toilets all at once, so we're getting a discount, and then put them in all at once, and then you'll see like a huge change in your expenses. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are a lot of different scenarios. And, it's just like, when we're going through due diligence on a property. there isn't a single property out there that's going to be cookie cutter, right, with another property across the street. So not every property is going to be an ideal candidate for, a water conservation project, or it may not fit in your particular business plan, right? So it just really depends on how long you're going to hold the asset for and what you're trying to accomplish. So like in your situation where you have, 26 units and 13 of them have already been upgraded, my first question would be, the toilets that were placed in that are upgraded, are they running efficiently? Because not every toilet is created equal. And sometimes toilets can get placed into applications where you end up increasing the water usage because they're not pushing the waste down the line. And residents are having to double flush, or the flappers will corrode over a certain amount of time, and that creates some of those silent leaks in the toilet. So we always verify that. But if that looks good, then on the other side, on the other 13 toilets, depending on how old they are, right? I mean, if you're still running, 3.5 gallon per flush toilets and it hasn't been maintained, more than likely it would make sense. If you're going to hold the property for 3 to 5 years, it would make sense to pull those out. I mean, they're not very expensive to put in, because at the end of the day, when you go back to rub back to the resident, if for some reason they come up for renewal and your competitor property has completely, upgraded all of their interior plumbing and they're rubbing back also, but they're only rubbing back, let's say 60% because they dropped their bill so much, that could be, depending on the class of property, that could be the answer of whether or not you get a renewal or whether or not you're going to have a vacant unit. Because a lot of these residents in some of these classes of properties are living paycheck to paycheck, and $20 a month or $50 a month is going to be that deciding factor for them.
That's a really good comparison, or a good way to put it into perspective. I think when
Yeah.
you're thinking about comps, the property I'm mentioning, we kind of get to do whatever we want, to tell you the truth, because we own everything in that town. So that's a little bit different of a situation.
That
Still,
is.
still
That's a rare situation, Kaylee.
that's all kind of the idea. So that's why,
Yeah.
for me, small towns haven't been a bad thing. We're just like, well,
Yeah.
buy as much as you can in that same area, and it's going to be a
Yep.
reasonable price. And then that way, as far as demand and all that, we control all that. So
Yeah.
in a bigger city, you have to be a little more conscious, I guess, yeah,
Yep.
of competitors and your prices. And, $10, $20 makes a big difference.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
good comparison. You mentioned in the last explanation what we were talking about, a little bit about, so I write little notes, a little bit about what works and what doesn't work. So I wanted you to expand for our audience a little bit on, for cash flowing multifamily, or cash flowing commercial properties. Let's just go there.
Mhm.
What applications seem to be useful for using SAS or using water conservation, and what seem to not get so much of an impact?
So my recommendation is that anytime you are working with a property that is built before 1995, have it, front of mind of, you know, what what's the condition of the plumbing fixtures? How old are they? How many work orders are coming in? So whether it's, a single family, whether it's multifamily, whether it's hospitality, it doesn't matter. You should look at that, because while it's also environmentally conscious, right? It's the right thing to do. It's also the right thing to do to boost NOI. So to engage an organization like SAS, just call me for anything. That's always what I share, because that's my way of giving back in the community, is to help connect people with people, and then also to be like that sounding board and that resource. When I started in this particular industry several years back, there wasn't a resource to call, and I found myself Googling a whole bunch of stuff, and I was like, that's insane. There should be a platform for, like, if somebody says something's going on with, my water bills, I need to know who to call other than the utility provider, because they're just going to be like, sure, we'll come out and read your meter. So I can help walk you through that. Again, that's my way of giving back in the community. So at that point, if you have bathrooms, if you have like 50 or more bathrooms, that is kind of the pivotal point when you would want to have a turnkey service provider. And that's where SAS would be your best partner, because we'll be able to come in and access for installation 50 to 60 bathrooms per day. And so like if you have a 150 unit property, or 150 key property or something, we're going to be on and off very quickly. And then that first full monthly billing cycle, you're already starting to see the benefits of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, obviously we
Yeah.
want to protect our income. 50 toilets, huh? So hotels.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
that's something that we're going to be speaking about in other sections of our app, talking about exactly how the financing of that works, exactly how the business model for franchising works, that kind of stuff. So it's good that it kind of cross pollinates both of those things.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, because that's a completely different financial model, right? You're talking about keys versus doors. And then, what if you don't have guests every single night in the room? So you have to be able to factor that in. And from a renovation standpoint, it's not like, like a regular renovation. Typically, in hotels, you're going to renovate like one floor at a time. So that way you're not shutting the entire hotel down, or, setting it up where you might get negative reviews from guests saying that, hey, there's all this construction going on. So it's a lot of little things behind the scenes that people forget about. It sounds great, but you got to do your research, do your homework, right? Get educated.
Right, and that's exactly the point behind the app, is just what are the pros and cons of everything that makes you money. I mean, of course, you can, make money, but there's risks and rewards with everything. So
Yeah.
it's up to us to weigh that out. Now,
Yeah.
one thing that I wanted to ask you, so water conservation as a topic is awesome, but what I'm really kind of nerding out on right now is technology. And I'm curious if you guys are either having that conversation, or if in the industry it's being talked about or already utilized. There's a few things in single family as a broker that I'm obviously aware of because of a membership we have to TREC, Texas Real Estate Commission magazine, and some other stuff, that smart home technology is huge. So some of those smart home technologies that I'm seeing, and again, I don't know who provides it, what they cost, any information, and I don't know if it's already out there, but for example, monitoring how much the shower is using, how often it's being used, certain
Mm-hmm.
like the water heater when it needs to shut itself off because it's heated up enough, and we have a giant
Yeah.
tank. Or, for example, if there's an emergency, seeing when something looks crazy irregular, and then the technology either alerting someone or kicking in to where it shuts it off. Um,
Yep.
is there, or if you have leaks, the device is being able to detect that. Is there anything like that to help with? Because overall, any kind of less mistakes, less errors, less time leaking, less time, it all saves costs overall.
Yep.
So, you guys see any of that? And if so, what are you seeing?
Yeah. So water is extremely destructive. And I'm sure that you can relate to that, being a property owner yourself.
What?
Um,
Oh my God.
yeah. So, I mean, not only are you dealing with rising water and sewer rates on a consistent basis, but, when there is a leak, it's not if a leak is going to happen, it is when a leak happens. It is very destructive. So, how quickly you can get to it is critical. So, that is the great thing about today, is that we have the IoTs, so the Internet of Things, and that's something that we have been working on, and that I've been working on with our team for quite some time, to identify the right product that we would endorse out there, because there's so many different options, and there are some incredible options out there with fantastic technology, but it's really expensive. And that makes it really difficult when we're talking about, typical investors or syndicators. you don't want to spend, $40,000 on leak detection equipment or water consumption equipment for your property. So during the pandemic, because travel was shut down and I couldn't go anywhere, I found myself with a lot of extra time on my hands. So I reallocated my time and worked with our team to really focus in on, hey, we need to get these meter sensors up and going. We got to figure out, we got to make sure that we're accelerating the pilot. And that's what we did. So we had partnered with a manufacturer. They manufacture our devices in Canada, and they are essentially like a bracelet for your water meter. And this is perfect for any type of asset you have, because the sensor will sit on the meter and then it will connect to a relay that you would plug into an electrical outlet, within 1,000 feet away. And they're going to communicate together through a LoRa signal, which is one of the most secure cellular signals out there, because Wi-Fi can be inconsistent. So we have to go cellular. So that's the route we've gone. The cool thing about this is that after about 2 to 4 weeks of the sensor being on that meter, it's learning the water consumption behavior patterns of the property. And because of that, it's going to provide you water consumption analysis in real time down to the 1 minute level. And then in addition, if it detects an abnormality, it's going to send an immediate notification that, it's detected a leak that is, let's say, 12 gallons a minute. Like, how many of us as like homeowners, if we have a pool, we go to turn the hose on and we forget to turn it off, or like our kids forget to turn it off. And then all of a sudden you walk outside and like your pool is all the way up to the top. Stuff like this type of technology is going to alert. And it's really inexpensive too.
Oh yeah.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
I'll vouch for a long story I'll cut very short. A big flood happened because a main water line was basically punctured, let's just say that. And it was on the second floor of a mid-rise, and that went down through another floor, down into the garage. And so luckily the construction on the building was slightly slanted, I think on purpose, because the water actually drained, and instead of being super high, it became less and less and less as you go down the hallway.
Oh my
The
gosh.
unit that it went into was a couple feet tall.
Yeah.
So that got into the drywall, went up, and so it just creates all these crazy amounts of problems where you're having to do remediation, you're having to remove the flooring, the padding under the flooring, the walls, all the things, all the way down the hall, all the way down to the next hall,
Yep.
including the main hallways, and plus more. So
Yeah.
being able to detect that and shut it off, because basically what happened in this situation was that the only reason that something was done was because there were neighbors that happened to be there right directly next door, and they were alerted by the people. And so sometimes a leak or something could happen where necessarily the person didn't cause it. Something can just happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they were basically alerted because they saw a bunch of water coming into their complex. And so they called
Yeah.
on-call maintenance, but it took them, I think, took them an hour almost to get it completely shut off. So by the time all that damage is done, I mean, the water bill's obviously insane. And then obviously all the damage that results as well. So that's really cool that you're able to
Yeah.
monitor it like that.
Yeah, we're really excited. We actually we're working with some owners down in San Antonio on kind of a smaller property, and after we put the sensors on, we identified that basically their flappers in their toilets were leaking a lot, and we're able to identify it, tie it back to the flappers, because we're looking at the golden hour usage. So like when their property is asleep, like that 1:30 to 4 a.m. when most of the property should be inactive, you should see very, very little water loss. And they were actually seeing like 32 gallons a minute of water consumption, even when the property should have been inactive.
Hmm.
So going through and fixing some of that until they can raise enough, CapEx to upgrade is the perfect solution right now for them and with their investors.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
And I really like that stuff. So I'm really excited that you guys are getting involved in that. Now, so
Yeah.
that covers most of the um, the side of what you do and how it works, for increasing value by decreasing expenses. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you on your side of things personally, as a woman in multifamily, when you're, like me, and you're having meetings with like mail brokers, or having meals and meetings with owners and things like that, I think that the industry is primarily male dominated. Do you have any tips or anything that you do a little bit differently to maintain your professionalism and maintain your power? Is there anything that you want to kind of explain from your perspective that maybe you do differently in multifamily versus if you were involved in a large single family development, anything like that from your perspective?
Right. Yeah, so great question. My recommendation and what has worked for me really well is to do my research, right? So if, for example, if I'm going into a networking event and the host of that event has a bio, or on the meetup it has different attendees that are going to be there, do some research about that, and have some thought-provoking questions already teed up in your mind, so that way when you get into the networking event, or you come across opportunities to meet brokers or owners, that you're confident in what you're communicating, and you're not just like, oh, I've never been to this before, and you're timid. Be assertive, and everybody wants to help everybody. And that's the one thing that I have found in this particular space, is that if you ask and you're open, everybody is wanting to lift everybody up. And I love that. So being educated, right? Doing your research, and then be confident, because everybody is different and they're going to communicate differently, but be confident in yourself, believe in yourself, and that's going to exude a positive mindset and basically draw in, a more positive experience.
Have you ever had to deal with being around males all the time? You know what I mean? There's a lot of inappropriate conversation that happens, unprofessional comments that get dropped or made because it's kind of like the good old boy club,
Mm-hmm.
like that you have to deal with. How do you deal with that?
Yep. And that is a good question, because I have been in, quite a few of those conversations, and it's natural. It can be natural, but you don't need to shy away, right? So if you feel like you're offended or you are uncomfortable, you can make two decisions. You can politely excuse yourself and just say, it was so great connecting with you, and you can excuse yourself. That's a little more difficult to do when you're in the middle of a dinner. So instead,
Close that deal.
yeah, you know, if you're in a large group, I would recommend, depending on the situation, if you're in a large group, just kind of pass by and try to shift the conversation to something else, and then maybe have that conversation with that individual that made that comment in an offline conversation. And again, be confident in this. Don't be afraid, but also, we want to be able to be respectful to everybody at the table, and we want them to respect us. So if I said something wrong at a table, I look at it this way. If I said something wrong at a table and I didn't think it was wrong, I'm not sure that I would want somebody to call me out in front of everybody. I would want that person to lead and shift the conversation, and then have a private conversation with me later. And if that conversation is not positive, then I'm not going to interact with them. They shouldn't be a business partner, right? You don't want to go into business with people that you can't see eye to eye with.
Yeah, you don't have the same ethics and standards, and
Yes.
look at justice the same way, etc. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a good point that you bring up. I think so one of the biggest things that for me was actually a mental game, and then realizing that a lot of it is just literally in your head, but some of it gets triggered by things that we get brought up when you're brought up and things like that. That's actually at the end of the day the best way to handle it. Not necessarily shying away, but basically calling them out without yelling at them and calling them out, and basically saying, okay, there's my boundary, and we're going to go this way,
Yep.
and either don't pick it up, or like I've I've seen people before, whether it's on a date or anything, and they just keep asking. You're like, you are freaking clueless. Like, want to go there? Okay, then I'll go there. That makes me really
Right.
uncomfortable, and we're in front of a group. That makes you really uncomfortable. And would you talk to your daughter that way? I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Right.
Something like that. So if they keep pushing, that's one thing. But I mean, you're right.
Mhm.
If someone can't be, I guess, aware enough of, who they're interacting with,
Mhm.
that relationship's only going to be a longer relationship than that moment. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
yeah, that's
exactly.
advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, for example, what happens to me is when I'm meeting with someone, if they want to talk about like your dating situation or your marriage situation or anything like that, the biggest advice I've gotten from other female entrepreneurs that are younger and that are pretty, just like you are, they're always like, okay, so I just don't talk about that part of my life. You know what I mean? It has nothing to
Yep.
do with what we're doing in business together. We can talk about your
Yeah.
kids and your wife and your whatever your dating habit. But
Yes.
every time they turn it to you, like, well, how's yours or whatever, it's like, no, you mentioned you have two daughters. How old is the first one? Or like, you know what I mean? Just bring it back
Yes.
or pivot to the next conversation. And
Yep.
sometimes then like the guy's like, oh, you really don't like that. I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
They'll pick it up. Oh,
Exactly.
okay. And then they'll, move on. But
Yes.
yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's really important, and I love your self-confidence. I love the way that, you mentioned that so not just working on, your knowledge base of that person, the knowledge
Mhm.
base of that person, I think really helps because it helps to bring up those topics that if you need to, distract
Yes.
and take them down a different path, you can immediately bring up something that's about them, and then they're
Yeah.
going to talk about it, so it's actually really smart. But then the
Yeah.
self-confidence part too, for me, has also had to be, working on telling people no, working on taking time for myself, working on
Mhm.
my own self-confidence outside of the work world, so that
Yep.
inside. Do you find that that's helpful for you as well?
Yes. And here's what's kind of funny is that I find myself being more confident and assertive in my professional side, but then sometimes on my personal side, I really struggle with that, just feeling really confident or opening up those conversations. And, I'm working personally, that's part of my personal development is I'm trying to balance that, right? So it's normal though. And I think that that's what's really important, especially for us as women in multifamily, is to be honest about everything and to support one another through this and talk about it because we're not going to excel by ourselves. We have to do it as a team.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And women actually, so like, how sometimes you have a group of like, white people or a group of whatever, and then you have like the token Asians. Same thing for me as a woman all
Mhm.
the time. I'm like the token woman in a group of men, um,
Mhm.
and it's the same effect on that person's like psyche. And it's just the way that we work as humans, and so there's really not much you can
Yeah.
do about it except for move yourself into a room full of the same yous, so women or Asians or whatever, because
Mhm.
we all have our same cultural norms. We all have certain things about us, basically, whether it's
Yeah.
sex, gender, color, whatever it is. We just have these similarities, and it helps immediately to make us feel comfortable. And so usually our test scores go up. Usually our just everything excels a lot quicker whenever we're within a group of each other. So you're 100% right. Like, it's really important for us to come together like physically in a circle of women, and then not just
Yes.
be able to reach out to people like you. And I want an expert to talk. I'm like, no, I want a woman. I want other women
Yeah.
to you and feel like, okay, she's doing it, so can I.
Yep.
She's confident, I can be too. And just be an example. So thank you very much, Kelly, for being on with us today.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Now, if our guests have any questions, or anyone reading this later has any questions about how they can utilize savings on water or water conservation in general, what's the best way to get a hold of you and or engage your company?
Sure. The best way to get in touch with me personally, I'm fairly active on Facebook as well as LinkedIn. So very simple. You can just search for the hashtag the potty princess. So the potty princess, you put that hashtag into Facebook or LinkedIn, you're going to get to me. That's kind of my nickname. I run with it. I'm fine with that. Or you can reach out to my company website, which is SAS conserve and there's a contact us button, and that actually comes directly into my email. So I see every single request that comes in, and then I'll connect there. So whether you're wanting to connect and need a resource for water conservation, or you're wanting to connect to network and learn about additional multifamily journeys and what we can do together, I'm all about building out the network. So let's do it.
Awesome. Seriously appreciate your time today. And everybody, thank you for listening and or reading. And see you all next time.